Hey Reddit. I'm not sure why I'm here sharing this, but I guess I'm just looking for some advice or at least a place to vent. My life has been a mess these past few months, and I still can't fully wrap my head around it. Let me start from the beginning. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 15 years. We've had our ups and downs, but I thought we had a solid relationship. We have 2 kids, Jamie, who's 17, and our daughter, Claire, who's 25 and just got married last year. Emily was always the center of our family. She was organized, charming, and made everyone feel welcome. I was the guy who thought I'd hit the jackpot, but somewhere along the line things started to feel different. It all began with subtle changes in Emily. She became colder, more distant, like she was mentally checked out. She'd stop doing little things for me, things she'd done for years, like making my coffee in the morning or asking how my day went when I got home. She'd smile less, and there was this constant tension in the air. But whenever I tried to bring it up, she brushed me off, saying I was just overthinking things, that she was just tired from work. And then the phone. Emily was always on her phone, and she guarded it like it was some kind of sacred artifact. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly lock the screen and shove it into her pocket, saying she was just talking to her friends. I wanted to believe her, so I ignored the red flags. After all, we'd been married for years. Emily was the mother of my kids. I trusted her. But things kept getting stranger. She'd go out for girls' nights and come back later than usual, smelling like a cocktail bar. She told me she was reconnecting with her old friends, that she deserved some fun after all her hard work. But it didn't sit right with me. Something was off, but I pushed it aside, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then one night, I decided to surprise her. She was supposed to be at a dinner with her friends, so I thought I'd take the kids out to a nice restaurant and surprise Emily by joining her afterward. I texted her a few times to see where she was, but she didn't answer. Figuring she might just be having too much fun to check her phone, I decided to drive over to the restaurant she'd mentioned to see if she was still there. As I parked and walked up to the entrance, I spotted her sitting by a window, but she wasn't alone. My heart stopped. Sitting across from her was her boss, Mike. I'd met him a few times at office events. Charming guy, maybe a bit too smooth for my liking, but I never thought much of it. They were laughing, leaning in close, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was far too familiar for my comfort. The way she looked at him, that was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I felt sick, but I couldn't look away. They looked too comfortable, too intimate. Every bit of doubt I'd pushed aside came rushing back, and the truth hit me like a freight train. Emily was cheating with her boss, and here I was, standing outside the window like some kind of fool, watching my wife laugh with another man. I stayed there, frozen in place, until they finally got up to leave. She didn't even see me as they walked out together, laughing, oblivious to the fact that her husband was right there, watching everything. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I drove home in silence, my mind racing, my heart shattered. The Emily I thought I knew, the woman I'd loved for so many years, was gone. And all I was left with was a hollow, gut-wrenching sense of betrayal. The next few days after seeing Emily with Mike felt like a slow-motion nightmare. I'd wake up, go through the motions, but my mind was constantly replaying that moment outside the restaurant. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her laughing, touching him, looking at him in that way she hadn't looked at me in years. It was like someone had taken my life and twisted it into something unrecognizable. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to scream and demand answers, but I knew that if I rushed into this, she'd probably just deny it, spin it around, maybe even make me feel like I was crazy. So I decided to gather evidence. I needed to be sure to have proof. If this was really happening, if my wife, my partner of 15 years, was betraying me, I needed to know all of it. So I started observing her more closely, paying attention to things I'd ignored before. Suddenly, all those little details I'd brushed off as nothing were glaring red flags. She'd come home late from work and go straight to shower, saying she was exhausted and needed to relax. She'd be glued to her phone, texting with a grin, but if I walked into the room, she'd close it immediately. When I asked who she was texting, she'd laugh it off and say it was just the girls. I'd always respected her privacy, But now I started checking her phone when she left it unattended, which was rare. But every time I got my hands on it, there was nothing suspicious. No messages from Mike, no calls, nothing. It was like she knew exactly how to cover her tracks. Either she was deleting messages or they were using some app one didn't know about. One night, she was in the shower, and I decided to check her laptop. I felt horrible doing it, like I was invading her privacy, but I had no choice. If she was going behind my back, I had the right to know. As I opened her laptop, my heart was pounding. I clicked on her email, and that's when I found it. An entire folder, buried deep, labeled work stuff. In that folder, there were emails back and forth between her and Mike. And they weren't just work emails. They were filled with inside jokes, references to places I didn't recognize, pet names, and hints about sneaking out during lunch breaks. I kept scrolling, feeling sicker with every line. I came across one message where Mike mentioned a special night, thanking her for all the memories, and saying he couldn't wait for the next time. My blood boiled. This wasn't some innocent friendship. She was lying to me, hiding things, and here was the proof. But the worst was an email from a month ago where he mentioned our weekend getaway. I stared at the screen, trying to remember where she'd told me she'd been that weekend. She'd said it was a girls' retreat out of town, something she'd planned with her friends for a long time. And I'd believed her, taken the kids for the weekend, and even helped her pack. Now I realized that weekend had been a lie, a cover for her to be with him. I felt humiliated, used, like I was the biggest fool on the planet. But I wasn't done. I needed more. I started checking her bank statements, phone records, anything I could get my hands on. And it was all there, right in front of me. Charges from hotels, late-night calls to numbers I didn't recognize, even charges from fancy restaurants and bars that I'd never been to with her. She'd been living a double life, and I'd been completely blind to it. The realization hit me in waves. She'd lied to my face, time and time again, and I'd let her. I'd believed every excuse, every story about girls' nights and work dinners. It felt like everything we'd built, everything we'd shared, was just a joke to her. She'd betrayed me in the worst way possible, and she hadn't even cared enough to try to hide it properly. I went to bed that night and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the rage simmering beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to break something. But I stayed silent, biding my time. I needed to confront her, to see her reaction when she realized I knew everything. But I wanted to do it on my own terms. And so I waited. The confrontation came a few days later. I'd been planning it in my head, imagining how it would go, what I'd say, what she might say in return. Part of me expected her to deny everything, to try and weasel her way out with more lies. But another part of me was hoping, stupidly, that maybe she'd show some remorse, some kind of guilt for what she'd done. It was a Friday night, and the kids were staying over at a friend's house. I couldn't have asked for a better setup. Emily came home late, her makeup too perfect, her perfume too strong, and I knew exactly where she'd been. The sight of her made my blood boil. She walked in like nothing was wrong, dropping her purse on the counter, barely even looking at me as she pulled off her coat. "Hey," she said casually, as if she were coming home from a day at the office, not from some tryst with her boss. "How was your day?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. How about you tell me about your day, Emily? Or maybe the past few months." She stopped, turning to look at me, her face blank for a moment. Then she rolled her eyes, her mouth twisting into a smirk. "Oh God, are we really going to do this? Are you really going to get all suspicious again?" I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "Suspicious? Emily, I know. I know everything. I've seen the emails. I know about the hotels, the late nights, the lies. I know about you and Mike." For a moment, she looked shocked, her eyes widening just a bit. But then, just as quickly, she crossed her arms, that same smirk creeping back onto her face. "So what? What do you want me to say? It's not like you were giving me any reason to stay around here. You're so wrapped up in your own little world, always working, always doing your thing. I needed something more." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The sheer audacity, the utter lack of remorse. I'd expected excuses, maybe even an apology. But she was standing there, actually blaming me for her betrayal. "Are you kidding me?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I've been here, Emily. I've been working hard to provide for this family. For you and the kids. Everything I do has been for us, and you're telling me that's not enough." She shrugged, as if she couldn't care less. "Look, I'm not going to apologize for wanting to be happy. Maybe if you'd paid a little more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look somewhere else." I laughed bitterly, feeling something inside me snap. "Wow, that's rich, Emily. You're going to pin this on me? After everything I've done for you, everything we've built together, you're going to stand there and act like I'm the problem." She just rolled her eyes again, brushing her hair back with that arrogant flick of her hand. "I don't expect you to understand. You never really saw me. Mike gets me. He knows how to make me feel special." That was it. Hearing his name come out of her mouth, hearing her actually defend him, it made my stomach turn. I couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. "So what now, Emily?" I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. "Are you planning to run off with him? Leave your family behind? Or were you hoping to keep playing both sides, sneaking around whenever it suited you?" She shrugged again, a careless, indifferent shrug. "Honestly, I haven't decided yet. I was hoping we could work something out. I mean, it's not like the kids need to know. We could just keep things casual. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." I stared at her, stunned by how cold she was, how shameless. She wasn't even pretending to care, wasn't even trying to apologize or make amends. To her, this was just another inconvenience, something she thought I'd just deal with, so she could keep living her double life. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "You think you can just keep going like this? You think I'd be okay with you cheating on me, lying to my face, and sneaking around with another man? You're delusional, Emily." She smirked, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, please, you're acting like a saint, but you were never perfect either. Maybe if you were a better husband, this wouldn't have happened. I needed something more, and you just couldn't give it to me." Her words felt like knives, each one twisting deeper into the wound. All the love I'd had for her, all the trust. It evaporated in that moment, replaced by a cold, unfeeling anger. "Well, congratulations, Emily," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "You wanted more, and now you've got it. I want a divorce." For the first time, I saw her face falter, a flicker of something. Maybe shock, maybe fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same smug expression. "Fine," she spat. "If that's what you want. I'm not going to beg you to stay. I deserve better, and so do you, apparently." She turned, picking up her purse, and without another word, walked out the door. Just like that, as if our marriage, our family, our life together meant nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her cold, indifferent expression, heard her callous words echoing in my mind. "I deserve better," Shed said, as if I'd been holding her back all these years. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd dedicated my life to, and she just walked out as if I were nothing but an afterthought. The next morning, Emily didn't come home. She didn't even text to check on the kids. I found myself scrambling to make breakfast, pack lunches, and get them ready for school on my own. I hadn't realized how much of my daily routine had relied on her, and now I was navigating this alone. When Jamie asked where Mom was, I forced a smile and told him she had to leave early for work. Claire didn't ask. She just watched me with a knowing look that made my stomach sink. She was older. She could probably sense that something was wrong. After I dropped them off, I drove to a nearby park and just sat there, trying to make sense of everything. I'd spent the past 15 years building a life with this woman, trusting her, believing in us. And now I was faced with the reality that it had all been a lie. The love, the promises, the future we'd planned. It felt like it had been ripped out from under me, leaving me standing on broken ground. Over the next few days, I kept waiting for Emily to come back, to at least have a real conversation. But the only contact I got from her was a single text message. "Let's keep things civil for the kids. I'll come by on Saturday to pick up my stuff." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to fix things. She was treating this like a business transaction, something she could just wrap up and walk away from. I kept it together for the kids, tried to act like everything was normal, but inside, I was falling apart. I'd catch myself staring blankly at the dinner table where she used to sit, or walking into our room and expecting to see her there. Every part of our house was filled with memories of her, of us, and now each one felt like a painful reminder of her betrayal. I felt lost, like I was living in a house haunted by ghosts of the life we'd once had. When Saturday finally came, Emily showed up as casually as if she were picking up groceries, not ending a marriage. She didn't look me in the eye as she walked through the house, gathering her things, shoving them into bags like they were meaningless. I stood there, silent, watching as she packed away pieces of our life together, feeling my heart break over and over again. Finally, as she was getting ready to leave, I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "So that's it? You're really just walking away?" She looked at me with that same cold expression, barely a hint of emotion in her eyes. "What did you expect, Matt? Some big emotional goodbye? I told you I need to move on. I'm tired of pretending." "Pretending?" I echoed, the word feeling like a slap. "Was our whole marriage just pretending to you?" She sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Look, it was good for a while, but people change. I changed. I need more than what we had." "More?" I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You mean your boss? Your affair? Was that worth throwing away everything we built?" She shrugged, not even flinching. "I don't expect you to understand. It's not my fault if you can't accept that I needed something different." I stared at her, trying to find some trace of the woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I'd spend my life with. But she was gone, replaced by this stranger who saw our marriage as something disposable, something she could toss aside without a second thought. My heart ached with a kind of pain I'd never felt before, a deep, raw grief mixed with anger and disbelief. Before she left, she paused at the door, turning back with a look that was almost smug. "Oh, by the way, you should know Mike and I are officially seeing each other now. I didn't want you to find out from someone else." I felt the final piece of my heart shatter. "Are you serious? You're flaunting this in my face now?" She shrugged, completely unaffected. "I just thought you deserved to know. I don't owe you anything else." And with that, she walked out, leaving me standing in the doorway, watching as she got into her car and drove away. Just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone with the ruins of our life together. That night, I sat down and tried to make sense of it all, but there was no sense to be made. I realized then that I needed to accept the truth. The woman I'd loved, the woman I thought was my partner, had been nothing but an illusion. She wasn't who I thought she was. I'd been living with a stranger all along, someone who could betray me so easily, so coldly, without a single hint of remorse. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. I went to work, picked up the kids, tried to keep things normal, but inside I was barely hanging on. Every night after I put Jamie and Claire to bed, I'd sit in the empty living room, replaying everything over and over, trying to understand how it had all fallen apart. I kept wondering if there was something I'd missed, something I could have done differently. But every time I started to think that way, her cold words and indifferent expression came rushing back, reminding me that she'd made her choice long before I ever knew about it. I didn't want to tell anyone, but keeping this secret was eating me alive. I finally broke down one night and called my best friend, Jake. We hadn't talked much since his move to Chicago a couple of years ago, but he'd always been there for me through the toughest times. When he picked up, I didn't even know how to start. I just said, "Jake, she's been cheating on me, with her boss." My voice cracked, and suddenly I was choking on the words, struggling to hold back tears. He was silent for a moment, probably as stunned as I'd been, but then he said, "Matt, man, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this. Are you okay?" Hearing those words felt like a lifeline. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just listen, to know what I was going through. I told him everything. The lies, the confrontation, her unapologetic attitude, the way she'd walked out without a second thought. He listened quietly, letting me vent, never interrupting. By the time I finished, I was exhausted, emotionally drained. "I don't know what to do, Jake," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I feel like my whole life has fallen apart. I don't know how to move forward. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, Matt, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one day at a time. Focus on the kids, on yourself. You're going to get through this. And I'm here whenever you need to talk. Hearing that gave me a small sense of comfort. I wasn't alone in this, even if it felt like it most of the time. But no amount of reassurance could take away the raw, relentless ache inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow inadequate, that maybe I'd failed as a husband, that maybe if I'd been different, she wouldn't have left. I knew logically that wasn't true, but emotions don't always follow logic. In the weeks that followed, I fell into a pattern. I'd put on a brave face for the kids, hold myself together at work, and then come home to the empty house, where I'd crumble all over again. Emily barely contacted me unless it was about the kids, and even then, her messages were short and impersonal. I hadn't told Jamie or Claire the full truth yet. I didn't want to burden them with adult problems, but they weren't oblivious. Claire, especially, would sometimes ask if I was okay, giving me these sad, worried looks that broke my heart. Then one day, I got an unexpected message from Emily's mom, Linda. She and I had always gotten along, and she adored the kids, but since everything had happened, I'd been avoiding her. I didn't want her to know the truth, didn't want to turn her against her own daughter. But Linda was sharp, and apparently, she'd started to piece things together. Matt, she'd written, I'm so sorry for what Emily's put you through. I can't believe what I'm hearing. If you ever need to talk, please let me know. You and the kids mean the world to me, and I don't want you to go through this alone. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness reading her message. It was comforting to know she was on my side, but it hurt to think that even Emily's own mother was shocked by her behavior. It was like a confirmation that this wasn't my fault, that this wasn't something I could have prevented. I replied, thanking her, and she invited me to bring the kids over for dinner. I decided to go, thinking it might be good for the kids to spend time with their grandma, and maybe it would do me some good to get out of the house. So that weekend, I took Jamie and Claire to Linda's place, hoping for a brief escape from the misery of my daily routine. When we arrived, Linda greeted us with hugs, and she took one look at me and immediately knew I was struggling. After dinner, when the kids were busy playing in the living room, she pulled me aside and said, Matt, I know this isn't easy, but please remember, you're a wonderful father and a good man. None of this is your fault. Emily made her choices, and they don't reflect on you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been holding on to this silent guilt, this feeling that I must have done something wrong. But hearing Linda say that, knowing she could see through all of Emily's lies, felt like a weight lifting, even if just a little. Over the next few weeks, I began to make peace with the reality of the situation. I'd lost my wife, my partner, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, but I still had the kids, and I still had myself. I knew I had to start putting myself back together, not just for my own sake, but for them. They needed a strong father, someone they could rely on, someone who could show them that it was possible to rebuild, even after heartbreak. But just as I started to find my footing, the next blow came. As time went on, I began to carve out a new routine. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the weight of everything would hit me all over again, but I was learning to cope. The kids were my main focus, and I poured myself into being there for them. Claire was about to get married, and the preparations were a welcome distraction from the mess that was my personal life. Watching her step into a new chapter was bittersweet. I felt both proud and haunted, knowing that my own marriage had fallen apart. One day, Claire came to me with a serious expression. Dad, I need to talk to you about the wedding. I nodded, assuming it was about the usual logistics, but the hesitation in her eyes told me otherwise. It's about Mom, she said slowly. I don't want to upset you, but she's bringing Mike. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. The thought of seeing Emily at the wedding was hard enough, but knowing she'd be flaunting her relationship with the man who had been a part of her betrayal, it was almost too much. Claire reached out, squeezing my hand. I understand if you don't want to come, but I really want you there, Dad. You're my family. You've been the rock through all of this, and I can't imagine getting married without you by my side. Hearing that was both a comfort and a curse. I didn't want to let her down, but the thought of sitting there, watching Emily and Mike as if they hadn't torn my life apart, felt like more than I could bear. But I knew that if I didn't go, I'd be letting Emily and her choices steal yet another precious moment from my life. And I wasn't going to let that happen. "Don't worry, Claire," I said, forcing a smile. "I wouldn't miss your wedding for the world." The day of the wedding arrived, and I took a deep breath as I walked into the venue. Claire looked radiant, her happiness filling the room. I focused on that, on the joy of seeing my daughter start her own family, but it was hard to ignore the inevitable tension in the air. I hadn't seen Emily yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. When the ceremony started, I felt a wave of emotion hit me, stronger than I'd expected. I watched Claire exchange vows, looking at her groom with such trust and love. My heart swelled with pride, but there was also a deep ache, a reminder of the promises I'd made once and how they'd been shattered. During the reception, I spotted Emily and Mike at a table across the room. They were laughing, smiling, acting as if they hadn't turned my life upside down. Emily looked over at me, and our eyes met. I couldn't read her expression. It wasn't exactly guilt, but there was something there, something I couldn't quite place. She looked away quickly, leaning in closer to Mike, as if to make a point. But I wasn't going to let them ruin this day. I stayed close to Claire and her new husband, focusing on the joy of the occasion. Friends and family came over to congratulate me, telling me how proud I must be. I smiled and nodded, keeping my attention on my daughter, refusing to let Emily and Mike's presence overshadow the happiness I felt for her. Then, just as I thought I'd made it through the night unscathed, Emily approached me. I could tell she'd had a few drinks, her eyes slightly glazed as she made her way over. "Matt," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in a long time. "Can we talk?" I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Emily?" She hesitated, glancing around before looking back at me. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, but I wanted to say it." I stared at her, not sure how to respond. It was the first time she'd apologized, but the words felt hollow, like something she'd rehearsed rather than something she truly meant. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steady. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" She took a shaky breath, her gaze shifting. Seeing Claire so happy, it just reminded me of what we used to have. "I know I messed up, and I know I hurt you. I don't know, Matt. I thought this was what I wanted. But now, maybe I was wrong." I felt a surge of anger. Here she was, finally realizing the cost of her actions, but only because she'd seen something she couldn't have anymore. It was almost laughable. For months, she'd been so cold, so indifferent, and now, at our daughter's wedding, she decided she wanted to express some kind of regret. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice low, "you made your choice. You walked out on me, on our family, and you didn't look back. Don't stand here now, in the middle of Claire's wedding, and act like you suddenly care. It's too late for that." She flinched, as if my words had finally hit her. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's too late. I thought I owed you an apology." I stared at her, feeling the weight of everything she'd put me through. "An apology doesn't fix anything, Emily. It doesn't undo the damage, and it doesn't change the fact that you threw us away." She nodded, looking down. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of genuine regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. Whatever she felt, it was hers to carry. I'd already been carrying it long enough. As she walked away, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. I'd spent so long waiting for some acknowledgement from her, some sign that she understood what she'd done. But now that I'd heard it, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need her apology, her explanations, or her guilt. I was done. I watched as she rejoined Mike, who seemed oblivious to the conversation we just had. She'd made her choice, and I was finally ready to make mine. I turned back to the party, focusing on the people who truly mattered, the friends, the family, and most of all, my daughter and her new husband. The love and hope I saw in their eyes reminded me that life could go on, that happiness could still be found, even after everything. That night, as I drove home alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Emily's betrayal had broken me, had taken everything I thought I knew and turned it upside down. But somehow, in the midst of it all, I'd found my way back to myself. I'd survived, and now I was ready to start truly living again. After the wedding, something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I'd spent so long waiting for Emily's apology, hoping that she'd understand the damage she'd done, that it had consumed me. But now I realized her regret didn't matter. Her apologies, her explanations, they couldn't change anything. I'd finally closed that chapter, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The next few months were about rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others. I still had moments where I'd catch myself thinking about her, feeling that old ache. But those moments were becoming fewer, fading like an old bruise. I was healing, day by day, and I focused my energy on the things that mattered: my kids, my health, and rediscovering the person I was before the betrayal. I started working out more, something I'd neglected during the chaos of the divorce. At first, it was just to clear my head, to channel my frustration and pain into something constructive. But it quickly became more than that. I found strength in the routine, in setting goals and pushing myself. It was empowering, like I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. I'd wake up early, hit the gym, and come back home feeling like I was ready to face the day. It was a small change, but it gave me something to look forward to, something that was just for me. My relationship with the kids became my top priority. Jamie and Claire had both been affected by the divorce in different ways. Jamie was quieter, more withdrawn, but he'd come to me every so often, asking questions, trying to make sense of it all. I made sure to be there for him, to answer his questions honestly, even when they were hard. I didn't want him to grow up with a warped view of relationships because of what happened between his mother and me. Claire, on the other hand, had been stronger through it all. I think her wedding had been a turning point for both of us, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in life, despite the pain. She and her new husband would come over for dinner occasionally, and I'd watch them together, feeling a mixture of pride and hope. I wanted to believe that, despite everything, love was still worth it, that it could still be genuine and real. One evening, a few months after the wedding, I was sitting in my living room when Jamie came up to me, looking a bit nervous. He had something on his mind. I could tell by the way he shifted his weight, looking anywhere but at me. "Dad," he said, finally meeting my eyes, "are you ever going to, date again?" I was taken aback, not expecting the question. I hadn't even thought about dating. The idea of letting someone else into my life, into the parts of me that were still tender, still healing, felt like a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take. "I don't know, Jamie," I said honestly. "I guess I haven't really thought about it. Right now, I'm focused on you and Claire, on rebuilding our lives." He nodded, but there was a thoughtful look in his eyes. I want you to be happy, Dad. I don't want what Mom did to make you feel like you can't trust people." Hearing that from my son, his quiet, unspoken worry for me, was a reminder that I wasn't the only one healing. We were all moving forward in our own ways, learning to trust again, to open ourselves up despite the scars. I reached out, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Thanks, Jamie. I'll be okay. We all will. It's just going to take time." As the months went by, I slowly started to expand my circle, reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from. I went out for drinks with some coworkers, joined a local hiking group, and even signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. It felt good to be around people again, to have conversations that didn't revolve around the past or the pain. I was rediscovering who I was outside of the role of husband and father. For the first time in years, I was just Matt. One day, during one of my hikes, I met someone. Her name was Rachel, and she was different from anyone I'd ever known. She was warm, down to earth, with a laugh that made everyone around her smile. We started talking, first just about hiking, sharing stories about places we'd traveled to, and gradually our conversations became more personal. She'd been through her own hardships, a divorce a few years back that had left her with her own set of scars. We found comfort in each other's stories, in the shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild. Rachel didn't try to fix me or make me forget the past. Instead, she just listened, offering quiet empathy, allowing me to feel whatever I needed to feel without judgment. And over time, something grew between us. A gentle, steady connection that felt real in a way I hadn't expected. I hadn't been looking for love, hadn't even believed it was possible for me again. But somehow, it found me. Our relationship was nothing like what I'd had with Emily. There were no secrets, no games, no illusions. We were open with each other from the start, both cautious but willing to take the risk. I'd been so afraid of trusting someone again. But with Rachel, it felt different. She wasn't filling a void. She was simply adding to my life, helping me discover parts of myself I'd forgotten. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, she took my hand and asked, "Are you happy, Matt?" I thought about it, feeling the warmth of her hand in mine, the peace that had settled into my life. For the first time, I realized that the answer was yes. I was happy, not because I'd moved on from the past, but because I'd accepted it. Emily's betrayal was a part of my story, but it didn't define me. I'd taken the pain, the loss, and used it to grow, to become stronger. And now, sitting here with Rachel, I knew I'd found something real. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I think I am." As the months turned into years, Rachel and I built a life together, slowly and carefully. My relationship with Jamie and Claire grew stronger, and I watched them thrive, knowing that they'd come through the storm just like I had. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was mine. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes it feels impossible. But with time, patience, and the right people by your side, you can find your way back to happiness, even after heartbreak. To anyone out there going through something similar, my advice is this: don't let someone else's betrayal define you. You're worth more than the pain they left you with. Take your time, focus on the people who truly care about you, and remember, there's always a way forward. Even when it feels like everything has fallen apart, you can rebuild. And one day, you'll look back and realize just how strong you've become. Over time, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, not with the bitterness or sadness that had once consumed me, but with a strange sense of peace. I'd learned a lot through the journey, lessons that were hard-earned but worth every painful moment. Emily and I barely spoke these days except for coordinating things for the kids. She had moved on with Mike, though from what I'd heard through mutual friends, their relationship was as tumultuous as it was passionate. I tried not to think about them, but every now and then, a stray thought or memory would sneak up on me, bringing a brief pang of old hurt. However, each time it happened, it hurt just a little less. Those scars had faded into reminders of where I'd been, and how far I'd come. One day, Claire invited me over for a family dinner. She and her husband had recently bought a house, and they were hosting their first official gathering there. Jamie was coming too, and I knew he'd be bringing his girlfriend. It was an opportunity to have everyone together, to celebrate not only their new chapter but our family's resilience. As I walked into Claire's house, I was struck by how full of life it was. Pictures of family and friends lined the walls, and laughter echoed from the kitchen. I couldn't help but feel proud of her, of the young woman she'd become. Despite the turmoil she'd witnessed in our family, she'd grown into a strong, compassionate person, ready to create her own stable life. Jamie, too, had found his footing. I knew he'd struggled through everything, but he was coming out of it with a maturity that amazed me. After dinner, as we sat around reminiscing, Claire brought out a box filled with old family photos. We started flipping through them, laughing at the awkward hairstyles, the cheesy poses, and the memories that seemed like they were from another lifetime. There was a photo of Emily and me on our wedding day, our faces bright with naive optimism, blissfully unaware of the twists and turns that lay ahead. Claire looked at me, her eyes gentle. "Dad, you've been through so much. I just want you to know, we see how much you've sacrificed for us, and how hard you've worked to keep everything together. Jamie and I are so grateful." Hearing those words, I felt something shift inside me, a final piece falling into place. My kids knew, they understood, and they didn't hold any resentment or confusion about what had happened. In their eyes, I was still the father who had been there for them, even in my darkest moments. After everyone left, I stayed back to help Claire clean up. As we worked side by side in her kitchen, she gave me a small smile and asked, "So, are you and Rachel serious?" I chuckled, feeling a bit like a teenager caught by his parents. "I think so," I replied. "She's been really good for me. It's different this time. It feels honest." Claire nodded, seeming pleased. "I'm glad, Dad. You deserve to be happy." Later that evening, after I'd said my goodbyes and drove home, I sat on my porch, watching the stars blink in the clear night sky. Rachel would be over in a few days, and for the first time in years, I was actually excited about the future. Not a tentative excitement, not the fragile hope that had sustained me after the divorce, but a genuine belief that there was so much left to experience, to enjoy, to build. Emily had once told me that life was too short to be unhappy. At the time, I'd thought it was just her excuse to justify her actions, to abandon our marriage. But sitting there, I realized that maybe she had been right, though not in the way she'd intended. Life was too short, not to run from commitment, but to cling to bitterness, to let someone else's choices define my worth, or to waste time on regret. The betrayal had scarred me, yes, but it had also taught me resilience. It had shown me who I was at my core, and what kind of father, partner, and friend I could be. I'd lost something precious, but I'd gained a deeper understanding of myself, one that could only come from surviving something so painful. I'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about embracing it, letting it shape me without letting it control me. If there's one thing I could pass on to anyone reading this, it's that pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. Betrayal hurts, and loss can feel insurmountable, but life keeps moving forward. There's love, joy, and laughter on the other side of it, if you let yourself believe in it again. I sat back, looking at the road ahead, ready to face whatever came my way. I had my kids, I had Rachel, and most importantly, I had myself, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace.